Hello there, hockey fans, once again. Welcome to another episode of Anatomy of a Season, where we break down the season of a given team. I look at their journey to either success, futility, or somewhere closer in between. And today I look at a team with the quest to keep their dynasty alive, the 1982-83 New York Islanders. Sadly, the hockey world not all that long ago lost both Clark Gillies and Mike Bossy, two icons of the island, so I feel it was only fitting to cover this club. And yes, before anyone asks, a bio on Guy Lafleur is in the works as we speak. On this series in the past, I've covered the epic journey of the cardiac club known as the Crown Princes of Clutch, the Montreal Canadiens of 1992-93. And I also covered the 96-97 Detroit Red Wings, who went from being a dominant team who couldn't win the big one to a down-to-earth team who finally did. Check out those videos if you haven't already. It was hard to choose which Islanders team to pick from this era, but I went with this one because their fight to stay respected was on display. A little backstory, if you will. This picture was taken on May 16th, 1982, after a 4-game sweep of the upstart Vancouver Canucks. The New York Islanders, in just their 10th year of existence, have won their 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup. They're only the 3rd different franchise to accomplish this feat, and it's only the 5th time in NHL history, and as of 2022, the last to accomplish that feat. Toronto did it from 1947 to 49. Montreal did it as far as 5 in a row from 1956 to 1960. Toronto would do it again from 1962 to 1964. And the Montreal Canadiens would do it again from 1976 to 1979, which were 4 in a row. Both were original 6 clubs, and the fact that the Islanders are the first and to date only expansion team to accomplish it is quite something to behold. But let's rewind, however. Let's go back to the beginning in 1972-73. Islanders entering the NHL, and led by the brilliant mind of general manager Bill Torrey, the team was awful, however, at first, even for an expansion club. First coach Phil Goyette only lasted 48 games, and he was fired. Earl Ingerfield coached the team for the remaining games, but it didn't get much better. They had talent such as Billy Harris and Ed Westphal, and a hungry young goaltender by the name of Billy Smith. But this terrible year gave the Isles the first overall draft pick. And with it, they drafted Denny Potvin, a defenseman of the Ottawa 67s, who sparked comparisons to the great Bobby Orr. They also hired a new coach, Al Arbour, who had worked under some of the greatest minds in pro hockey, especially Scotty Bowman. However, Arbour was fired by the St. Louis Blues the prior season. Torrey felt this was the guy to guide his club, and while the team's fortunes didn't improve all that drastically, Potvin was brilliant, winning Rookie of the Year. Arbour knew this was the guy to build his team around. They drafted 4th overall gritty winger as well, Clark Gillies, two-way center Bob Bourne, and players like Nystrom, Bobby Nystrom that is, were maturing. In 1974-75, the Isles had their first winning season, a dramatic turnaround. And in the playoffs that year, they did the impossible. Down 3 games to none to the Pittsburgh Penguins, they became the first team in 33 years since the 1942 Leafs in the Cup Finals to come back and win a series in 7 games. And then they found themselves down 3-0 again to the defending Stanley Cup champion Philadelphia Flyers. Islanders fans believed, and my God, what is happening? They came back to tie the series, but they would lose in 7 games. But either way, the Isles were making headlines. The team kept growing as Smith, alongside with goaltender Chico Resch, formed the most dangerous goaltending combo going into the 1975-76 season. They then gave their second-round pick from 1974 a chance, a man that every team passed up on, Brian Trottier, and he won Rookie of the Year. Potvin won his very first Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman, and the Islanders had their first ever 100-point season. They made it all the way to the playoff semifinals, but sadly there was still one team better than them, and, well, better than everyone else for that matter at the time. The eventual champion Montreal Canadiens, who beat them in 5. In 1976-77, they had drafted a little-known American defenseman named Ken Morrow, but he wouldn't be seen for a while. They had another great season, and ran into another record-setting Habs year, however, as the Habs were 60 wins, 8 losses, and 12 ties, smashing records, but still managed to take the Habs to 6 games before losing. At this point, the Islanders weren't really what you'd call chokers. They just kept running into the one team guaranteed to be better than them year after year. In 1977-78, however, prior to the season, they drafted someone that many teams thought again was not good enough for the NHL. Mike Bossy, 15th overall. Also in that same draft class, they drafted a guy named John Tonelli later on. Well, Bossy set an NHL record for goals by a rookie in a season with 53, and of course won Rookie of the Year, the 3rd Islander in 5 seasons to do so. The Islanders had 111 points, 2nd best record in hockey, and finally have what it takes perhaps to beat the Habs at long last. Potvin wins the Norris again, and then they lose to underdogs Toronto thanks to Lanny McDonald in 7 games. Now the term choker is starting to make headlines, and they didn't really have an excuse of losing to the Habs anymore. They lost to a team that they probably should have beaten. And then came the 1978-79 season. Look at this, they had the best record in pro hockey this year, 116 points. Brian Trottier wins the scoring title, and league MVP Mike Bossy scores 69 goals. Al Arbour wins Coach of the Year. My goodness. Denny Potvin wins the Norris Trophy, and then they proceed to shit the bed against the Rangers team that they were significantly better than then, and went on to lose to the Habs. That Rangers team did. The Habs won their 4th cup in a row. Oy. The headlines were vicious. People were saying Torrey didn't build a strong enough team. Arbour's coaching was questioned, as was Potvin's leadership. And the likes of Mike Bossy, Brian Trottier, and Clark Gillies had their heart called into question after they all performed pretty poor in that series against the Rangers. Well, 1979-80 came around. The Isles had pretty much been written off. To quote Jet Li in the film Romeo Must Die, that was a mistake. Potvin missed more than half the season, however, and the team had 25 points less than last season. Nobody cared anymore outside the loyal fans on the island. All the headlines were if the Habs can keep their dynasty intact despite losing many key players, or if the Buffalo Sabres, now coached by former Habs bench boss Scotty Bowman, were the new dynasty, or the Philadelphia Flyers, who went unbeaten in 35 games, would be the one to do it. And also some punk kid from Brantford, playing for some expansion team at 19 years old, scored 137 points and won league MVP. But Torrey made a huge trade, one that some Isles fans, well, they balked at. Longtime fan favorite, and who many considered to be the heart and soul of the Islanders for many years, Billy Harris was traded to the Los Angeles Kings for all-star two-way forward Butch Goring. Well, the playoffs came. The Isles breezed through Los Angeles, Goring's former team, and surprisingly had an easy time with Boston. People were starting to notice a little bit. The Isles team was a little more focused. But now, there's no way they can get past Buffalo, who had the second best record in the NHL, and they do? In 6 games? They're in the Stanley Cup Finals at long last. But wait, lightning can't strike twice. They're facing the Philadelphia Flyers. The best team in the league, setting that NHL record of 35 unbeaten games. And wait, Tonelli, Tenystrom, he scores! The Isles are Stanley Cup champions. The choker label was gone for good. That captain whose leadership was called into question hoisted the cup. And yes, those players with no heart, well, one of them was Brian Trottier, who won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. In the 1980, 81, and 81-82 seasons, they were practically unstoppable. Best record in the league both times. Stanley Cup both times. The Conn Smythe Trophy those years? Well, 1980-81 went to the man who put the team over the top, Butch Goring. In 81-82, Mike Bossy took home the trophy. Young players started emerging. Gritty forwards such as Brett and Dwayne Sutter were coming to their own, and the hardworking John Tonelli had become an all-star. They were a big part of the lineup. So was Ken Morrow, and they added another former all-star, Mike McEwen, to their defense. Other than a scare from the 1981-82 opening round series against the Penguins, the Islanders were never truly in any danger of losing. Trottier was a player with heart, led by example, and played with such passion he influenced many greats such as Steve Yzerman. Mike Bossy was a scoring machine, the best sniper in the game. And if it wasn't for that punk kid from Brantford playing at Edmonton, he'd probably be winning many scoring titles by now. I'm sorry. Potvin was a tried and true leader, and a diverse defenseman in the vein of Bobby Orr. And no, don't at me, Bruins boozers. He's still not better than him, that's not what I'm saying. Nobody is. Are you happy? Alright, now where were we? Yes, Billy Smith won his first Vezina Trophy as the top goaltender in the league in 1981-82. This team no doubt is earning accolades, respect, and adulation. And they're the sultans of the hockey world, right? Right? Well, yeah, to be honest, they are, but not in the way they should be. Many pundits tried to say that these Islanders teams had it much easier than the Habs did. Despite beating 2 of the best teams in hockey to win their first Stanley Cup, people were pointing out the fact that in 1981 they breezed through a lowly Leafs club, and it took 6 games to beat that punk kid from Brantford and his merry men of frat boys, and how he made them look like fools. I'm going, wait, what? Anyway, and they beat a good but not great Rangers team, and then the underdog North Stars in the finals quite easily in 5 games. And then there's the 1982 Cup Finals. Pundits pointed out that they shouldn't have gotten that far. It shouldn't have gotten that far with the Penguins in the first round, and they were 2 minutes away from their dynasty being derailed. And again, beat a good but not great Rangers team again. Wait, what? Ugh. And then they dominated the upstart Quebec Nordiques team because it just, quote-unquote, wasn't their time yet. And the Canucks got a losing record and making their miracle run to the finals, and the Isles made easy work of them. And the fact that 1982-83 was going to be the year of the Oiler, where that punk kid, and for the 5 of you who don't realize it by now, is named Wayne Gretzky, was going to be a champion. despite the fact that his team choked terribly to the worst playoff team that year, the LA Kings. Yes, that's what many pundits and experts, quote-unquote, had said, but to give context, it was divided. Some pundits had common sense. Some thought Gretzky was too immature and not ready to be a champion despite smashing NHL records. Some thought it was unfair that he was stealing the headlines from players like Trottier, Bossy, and Potvin, who were proven winners. They didn't always need yearly personal accolades to prove how good they were, even though they won a fair share themselves. They did it by winning Stanley Cups. And beating weak teams, you say? Well, a lot of those weak teams beat great teams to get there. The Rangers teams were better than just good. And hey, playoff upsets happen. The whole issue with the Penguins, the Islanders still won. That's what matters at the end of the day. However, the Isles didn't let it get to them, really. They won with common sense. They knew that it etched their legacy of anything. But this team was not getting the respect they deserved, in my opinion, as those other so-called experts said that they were not on the level of those Habs or Leafs teams from way back when, or even the recent Habs dynasty. It's a tale of two mindsets. Anyway, our journey on this season begins with the 1982 NHL entry draft. Now, obviously dominating the league for 3 seasons means you don't get a high draft pick unless you make a big trade. That wasn't the case here. But the Isles actually made a good first-round pick in Pat Flatley, a star at the University of Wisconsin, which meant that they do sadly miss out on future Hall of Fame star Thomas Sandstrom in the second round. And while Flatley didn't end up living to his exact expectations, he did have a pretty good career as a defensive forward and a team leader who was loved by Islanders fans. Played 712 games for them, and later in his career was the team's captain. Their next picks didn't really amount to anything. Vern Smith played one NHL game. Gary Lacey never made it. They would pass up on the likes of Pat Verbeek, Kevin Deneen, and Dave Ellett in this portion. The fourth round, they drafted tough guy Alan Kerr, who actually had a pretty decent career. Rene Breton would never play a game. Roger Corco would play 79 games. John Tiano never played. Todd Okerlund never made it either, though I heard his dad kind of made it in the professional wrestling world in some capacity. And, the remaining picks never saw any action. They did miss out on Tony Granato, Ron Hextall, and Ray Ferraro, but oddly enough, Ferraro would actually become an Islander years later and have some good seasons there. Not a strong draft class at all, and this stuff would somewhat haunt the Islanders later, but not drastically. Going into training camp, it was business as usual on the island. Al Arbor had his boys focused. The fair-thinking pundits said don't be surprised if the Islanders repeat again and get that 4th in a row. But it will be a little more difficult after, as any team in pro sports wins a championship, time after time, new contenders do emerge, and that actually is a fact. But they weren't even referring to Gretzky and the Oilers exactly, at least not completely. They're referring more so to the teams in the Islanders' own division, the Patrick division. The Rangers were still strong, and some were thinking a playoff upset could be near. A Flyers team that had a brand new focus after the interleague turmoil plagued them last season. And the Washington Capitals, a perennial laughingstock, who made a blockbuster trade in the offseason acquiring all-star defenseman Rod Langway and Ironman center Doug Jarvis from the Montreal Canadiens, bringing them some much-needed playoff experience to boot and leaders to the team. And they drafted some kid named Scott Stevens. Even in the Adams division, the Bruins were looking great on paper. The Nordiques are showing growth, and you can't count out the Habs. They're contenders still year after year. And yes, obviously the Oilers in the opposing conference were a major threat too. But yes, the other side of the analysts were saying the Oilers' shocking playoff loss to LA matured them, that they'll learn from it. And that's possible. And said it'll be unlikely that the Islanders even survive their own conference, as like any dynasty, players age and get older. True to an extent, yes. I mean, you had Denny Potvin, who, yes, was pushing 30. Butch Goring was well into his 30s at this point, as well as Clark Gillies, who was also pushing 30. But Tonelli and Bossy were each just 25 years old. Trottier was only 26. And the Sutter brothers, guys like them, were still in their early 20s. But every one of them was still delivering. Opening day had at long last arrived. The first game of the year would be a Stanley Cup rematch. In Vancouver, with the home team, the Canucks, did something they couldn't do in the finals. That should be the Islanders by a score of 2-1 in a very tight-knit defensive game. But Smith was sensational in net, yet the naysayers had a field day, of course. Well, the Isles were about to shut them up, let's just say. They won their first game of the year, beating the Flames, an exciting back-and-forth game 5-4, with backup goaltender Rolly Melanson stopping 36 shots in goal. And look at this, hey now, they visit Gretz and the boys. And the Isles jump out to a 2-0 lead, but the Oilers come back to take the lead 3-2. Bossy and Goring make it 4-3, but the Oilers tie up to make it 4-4. And Dwayne Sutter scores the eventual game winner with 1:49 to go. Tonelli adds an empty netter, and the Isles send a message. An amazing team effort from everyone involved. The defense deserves a huge tip of the hat here as well. Langevin in person especially. They concluded their road trip and were a step away from home beating the New York Rangers 4-3 thanks to a big comeback courtesy of Bossy and Trache, as the former assisted on both the game-tying and winning goals in the third, both scored by Bossy, who had a 4-point night. Then came the next game, the home opener against their division rivals, the team that nearly upset them in the playoffs last season, the Pittsburgh Penguins, a game that was so heated, and something must have pissed the Pens off. Perhaps it was the raising of that third cup banner right in front of them in front of a sellout crowd at Nassau Coliseum. The game proceeded to have 233 total penalty minutes, but the Pens could not channel that energy into any goals as the Islanders crushed them 9-0. A game that Mike Bossy didn't even play to boot, the only game he'd miss all season. But Butch Goring did, and he scored a hat trick, his 13th career hat trick, and his first since December 30th, 1980. Stanley also had a big night with 3 points, and Potvin was, get this, a +5, while Morrow was a +4. The Isles continued to roll through the competition with this ongoing homestead underway. Down in the LA Kings 4-1, Tonelli and Bossy each had 2 goals. Potvin had 3 assists in the thrilling 5-4 win over the Canucks, where Bossy scored the game winner, and with under 2 minutes left, Brian Trache scored his 13th hat trick. And Bob Bourne had a big 4-point night in the 6-3 win over the division rival Capitals. And both men had huge nights again in a 5-2 win over the Rangers. 8 wins in a row, 5 at home, and yes, they're totally losing their touch. The win streak would come to an end, however, against the red-hot Chicago Blackhawks team on the road, thanks to a huge performance from their veteran goalie, future Hall of Famer Tony Esposito, stopping 33 shots. And the double S combo of Secord and Savard also did them in. Also, Tonelli and Brent Sutter did not play. Brent returned in a big 7-2 win over the Calgary Flames, where Potvin had 4 assists. The Islanders made it to their first ever trip to New Jersey to take on their new division rivals, the Devils. They just moved to the Garden State from Colorado. Tonelli returned to the lineup and had a goal and an assist, as did Goring. And Bobby Nye in a 4-2 win over the surprisingly competitive and usually draw Devils on that night. But the next game, 2 days later, between these teams on the road, will be a much different story. Still a win for the Islanders, this time 8-5. Both teams doubling up. Bossy and Potvin had 4 points. Bourne had 3 assists. What a way to end the month. Well, hey, would you look at that? Suddenly certain experts got quiet. The Isles are looking like themselves and are as good as ever. The only threats at this point in the division are the Flyers, as the Rangers are disappointing. The Caps' big moves didn't seem to be paying off, at least quite yet. 11-2-0. 22 points? That sounds about right with this bunch. Well, no surprise. Mike Bossy has 14 goals and 24 points. He's averaging nearly 2 points a game. And the big surprise here is Bob Bourne, as he had 3 30-goal seasons in the past. It was a scoring contributor for sure. He wasn't usually among the top 3 at any point in time. But he has such dominant numbers here, as 14 assists led the team that month. And of course, Trache, to the surprise of no one, runs at the top 3 with just a point behind Bourne at 17. All 3 men have excellent plus-minus numbers, but also Tonelli, Goring, and Nystrom were all standout performers to boot that month. And surprise, surprise, Danny Potvin leads all defensemen in scoring with 16 points and led the team in a huge +17 in that regard. But the Isles defense as a whole was amazing. Morrow, as well as Dave Langevin and Thomas Janssen, also had a big month, while Mike McEwen and Stephen Persson also played some big games. And of course, goaltending. Billy Smith has been carrying the heavy load for the prior 2 seasons, but does split significant time with Rolly Melanson. However, they're now going every other game, playing in net. And Melanson has developed enough of a reputation where they can at least share the load a little more even. As Smith gets older, but his numbers are pretty much what the usual what we see from him. And he even has a shutout already on the year. Melanson, however, is very impressive to boot, and his numbers only differ slightly from Smith's. November, however, didn't really begin all that great for the Isles, as they dropped a shocking loss at home to the lowly Penguins 3-1. They also had to fight to a tie with another weak team, the Detroit Red Wings 3-3. A big match with division rival Philadelphia saw them drop another game at home 6-3. And the second of the home-and-home series against the Flyers was a tie, as Billy Smith played at beauty, but the Isles were still now on a 4-game winless streak, and as some like to say, people are starting to talk. Well, the players were facing heavy criticism, mainly the likes of Tonelli, as well as Goring, Gillies, and Sutter, Brent Sutter that is, were taking a huge brunt of most of it. They finally pick up a win and end the senseless panic with a 4-1 triumph over the St. Louis Blues, as Bossy, Bourne, Merrick, Nystrom, and Trache each had 2 points in the win, and the defense played excellently to boot. But now a little bit of panic was setting in once again as they dropped back-to-back losses, getting shut out by the Stars, and then on the road to the Capitals. That's just 1 win in 6 games. And oh dear, look who's in town, the Edmonton Oilers, who are on a 3-game winning streak, but not exactly as dominant as the hockey media predicted at this point. And the Isles are triumphant! Whoa, yeah! A monster 3-point night for Bossy, while Goring adds 2 goals, and Tonelli has a monster night, trying to silence his recent naysayers. They would lose to the big bad Bruins, who were having a good season, but Bossy again was sniping away at the competition with a 3-point night over Chicago. But the story was John Tonelli, who had the biggest game of the year so far, with 4 points and a thrilling finish. The Hawks were up 4-3 with just over 5 minutes to go. Tonelli set up Janssen to tie the game. With 1:34 to play, the Islanders' hustle line of Merrick to Nystrom to Bourne. They score! The Isles win a nail-biter. But the Isles slide again. They get throttled 7-3 by their crosstown rivals, the Rangers, at Madison Square Garden, as Bossy, Bourne, Trottier, Tonelli, and Morrow all played pretty bad games. Even goaltender Billy Smith did as well. They would then fight to an 8-8 tie. Yeah, yes, you're reading that correctly. 8-8. This was the 1980s with the Minnesota North Stars. Bossy and Trottier looked much better, however, with 4-point nights, but Melanson and Smith were brutal in net. But the next game was opposite in that regard, as Melanson was outstanding in a 1-1 tie with the Bruins. A game that also saw Langevin return to the lineup after missing a few games, and that defense definitely needed a boost. Again, the Rangers had their numbers, shutting them out again. 3-0 in front of the hostile crowd on the island, and another tie, this one 3-3 with the Capitals. Tonelli again was stepping up, but many of the top dogs were facing criticisms. Even Trottier was being called out for the way he played in certain games. Butch Goring was also being blasted for his play. Same with Clark Gillies and even Bob Bourne. The Isles get a much-needed win, however, in a tight-knit battle with the Blues. Billy Smith and Mike Liud had an amazing goaltending duo, and Potvin scored the game winner with under 3 minutes to go. Oh boy, not a very good November, and the naysayers and panickers were back again, as this was indeed one of the worst months in recent memory. As a matter of fact, the last time they had a losing month was November 1979, the 1979-80 season. That's also the year where their dynasty began. But the Flyers were still good, and other teams were starting to gain traction. The Isles needed to start winning more, as a losing month was still out of the norm. No surprise again, as Mike Bossy stays their most consistent performer by far with 18 points. Trottier second this month with 14, while Stanley just slightly falls behind with 12. But as you can see, their plus-minus stats aren't all that stellar, and in the case of both Trottier and Bossy, significantly down from the prior month. But at least Bossy stayed in the plus. The Islanders had 66 goals in October, but just 42 this month. Bourne, Nystrom, and Goring, who had great Octobers, were all very disappointing in November. Speaking of disappointing, while Potvin still had a solid November with his 10 points, it was down from 16. And he still led all defensemen, and remember now, he led the team with a plus-minus of 17 in October. Well, the leader this one was Thomas Janssen with only a +4. But he deserves immense credit for being consistently their best defenseman that month, as Morrow had a pretty bad month, and while Langevin and McEwen were also below par in their play. McEwen also battling a few injuries. Goaltending, oh boy. Billy Smith at least had a winning record, but not a very good goals against average. Significantly up from last month, and while Melanson had a decent goals against average, his win-loss record was not so good, and the young goalie took his fair share of scrutiny. December didn't start well for the Isles either. They dropped back-to-back losses on the road to the Jets and the Leafs by scores of 4-2 and 4-1 respectively. The Leafs pulling a huge upset as they were having a pretty bad year. But in part 2 of that home-and-home series with the Leafs, the Isles got them back on home ice and beat them 6-3. Tonelli and Bossy both playing fantastic, and Melanson great in net. But then they'd follow that up by getting shut out by the basement-dwelling Red Wings team, now losing 4 of 5 to begin the month, losing to teams that they should be beating. And they were missing both Langevin and Janssen during this time, however, I should point out. But thankfully, they'd both return in an emphatic 7-1 win over the Devils at home. But it was a Sutter Brothers show. Both played their best games all year. And for Dwayne, maybe one of the best of his career with 4 points, and Brent had 3. While Potvin and Gillies each had 2 goals, the latter of whom playing his best game so far this year, their losing woes continued against Buffalo, losing 5-3, but then they went unbeaten in their next 3 games. Bossy broke out of his mini slump to score the 21st hat-trick of his career, as they finally got the better of the Rangers 5-2, and then they tied their division rival Flyers, as Bossy continued to rule with 2 goals, and then made it 9 points in 3 games in a 3-3 tie. Wow. With a very talented Quebec Nordiques team where Clark Gillies scored with 26 seconds to play to fight for the tie. The defense let Smith out to dry in a 5-1 loss to the Capitals, the hottest team in the NHL right now, who were now unbeaten in 14. And now the Isles have to worry about, in their division, another brand new contender. They won a 3-2 battle against the Whalers, however, as Melanson was great in that, but ended the month with another loss. This one 5-1 to Buffalo. The Top Guns were dead in the water, and Billy Smith was hung out to dry. Maybe the worry is valid. Well, now maybe it is time to panic. Even the biggest Islanders boosters starting to get a little concerned. Even the media and the press, of course, having a field day. Even the ones that were supporting them starting to kind of have a little doubt here and there. Yes, just recently we saw the Islanders have their first losing month in 3 years, but now they'd have their first back-to-back losing months since 1974-75. Perhaps wear and tear and other teams figuring them out is what happened, as the Flyers move into first place by 2 points, while the Red Hot Capitals, who are having their best season in franchise history at this point, are just a point behind the Islanders at third place. And you can never count out the Rangers. For the first time since this dynasty began, panic has now set in on the naysayers. Actually, we're racing some valid points, dare I say. Keep in mind the Isles only played 11 games in December, but Bossy's numbers were still at least up to par for the most part. Stanley looked the best he has all year, and while Trottier and Potvin tied for third with 7 points, that was well below Trottier's standards, but their plus-minus stats were all the highest among the team. Players such as Goring and Bourne continued to struggle. Potvin again led all defensemen in scoring, but his numbers kept slipping, while Tonelli's +5 was the best on the team, as he and Bossy were the two most consistent forwards in December. Langevin and Morrow improved their game big time, but were far from the best on the blue line. McEwen was even called the dreaded P-word in hockey. Pylon! Damn, and here's something strange Islanders fans aren't used to. Billy Smith not only having a losing month, but his first since October 1980, and his first winless month since March of 1980, the season prior. But a winless month at that. I mean, and his first dubious mark since with increasingly bad numbers. Smith, whereas Melanson had an excellent month, winning all games and only losing once, and a really good goals against average to boot. This was something that we weren't expecting. It wasn't a happy new year for the Islanders as January began, as they dropped a 2-1 loss to the Lily Penguins, despite how Melanson played in net. And he would need to, as Billy Smith was also having some injury issues at the time, and also there was concerns about his play. Also, Denny Potvin was going to miss a few games due to injury. But then something happened, something that awoke the Islanders, as suddenly they went on a tear. That's right, they started looking like the 3-time defending Cup champions they are. And once again, do what they always do, shut a lot of people up. The streak began with a 5-2 win against the Sabres, where the Sutter brothers shined. Another big night from Bossy as well as Janssen helped the Islanders beat the Nordiques 6-1. Another big win over the Jets, 4-1, where Melanson again looked great and continued to stay hot between the pipes. The dominance continued with a 5-2 win over the Devils. Melanson again superb. Bossy with 3 assists, Trottier with 2 goals, as Denny Potvin returns to the lineup. John Tonelli then achieved his second career hat-trick, and Trottier had a 4-point night in another 5-2 Islanders win, this one over the hapless Kings. Melanson stopped 38 shots. The Islanders weren't just winning games, they were dominating them. And that happened again against the Whalers, 8-1. The top dogs, Bossy, Tonelli, and Trottier each had 3 points, as McEwen and Morrow were also outstanding. And Billy Smith made his first start in a long time and stopped 32 shots. 6 wins in a row, and all dominant. And this is what we're normally used to seeing the New York Islanders in recent years. Their win streak, however, came to quite an end, but the bright side is they didn't lose. They visited the mighty Montreal Canadiens, who were determined themselves this year to reclaim their dynasty, and were having a really good season to boot. Trottier opened the scoring 35 seconds in, and later on he would make it 2-0, but Lafleur scores for the Habs, and the Isles lead 2-1 after one. They then take a lead after 2 periods, 3-2, but Bourne ties it on the power play in the third period. But just 1:26 later, Mats Hallen gives the Isles the lead. It almost looks like we're about to see 7 in a row, but Mark Napier of the Habs scores with 2:25 left to fight for a tie. A great showcase between two big teams, but the Islanders are still unbeaten, now in 7. But after an epic goaltending duo between Bob Frost of the Flyers and Billy Smith, the Flyers were able to get the better of them. The only goal of that game scored by Daryl Sittler. The streak is over in very tight fashion. Philly is still hanging on at first quite convincingly in the Patriot Division. And yes, many truly believe with good reason this is Philly's year. And to end the month, they embark on a Western road swing. That includes starting with a 6-4 win over the Kings. It's another hat-trick for Bossy, and a big night for Tonelli. Following that, Bourne has 3 points, and Smith stops 35 shots against the Canucks in a 5-3 win. And then they go into Edmonton to face the red-hot mighty Oilers, who the hockey media are making the crown princes of the NHL before they win anything. But the Isles take them to school again, this time 4-2. But Melanson steals the show with 34 saves, stomping the mighty Oilers scorers. And we're all ready to go into February. And indeed on February 1st, where they play a defensive battle with the Flames and fight to a 2-2 tie. But now let's just keep our focus on January. Well, this is a dramatic turnaround, but why would anyone be shocked? It's sad that the 3-time defending Cup champion team had anyone losing faith. At 9-2-1, they had 2 big streaks, showing the fact that they could still dominate. They could still outscore a high-scoring Smythe division to boot on the West Coast. The Isles are sending a message to the league. We're not done by a long shot. But there was still one team hotter than the Islanders all month, and that was the Flyers, as they now have a 9-point lead in first place. And they're still fighting off the Capitals. While this also looks back to normal, Mike Bossy has a huge 20-point month, again leading the team. Also with an impressive plus 11. Tonelli led the team in goals with 10, his 17 points giving him a huge month, while Trottier had, he had quite a month himself as well, just trailing once again behind. A great plus 9, as many forwards such as Bob Bourne were finding their form again, while Goran Gillies and Nystrom were also a major step up for the last 2 months, and the Sutter brothers were really coming up big. With Denny Potvin missing several games, Janssen stepped up huge. His 8 points led all defensemen, while Langevin played superbly, and McEwen and Morrow were back to fine form. All coming up huge in the absence of their captain, while Janssen also had a very nice plus 11, but the lead in plus minus goes to John Tonelli, who again was getting all things done at all ends of the ice. And hey, look at these goalies. After having one of the worst months of his career and battling injuries, Billy Smith returned to form. He only played 3 games a month due to injuries and whatnot, but a monster improvement on his goals against average. Melanson, however, was brilliant. 7 wins, making epic saves. And yes, suddenly he was in the conversation for the very award Billy Smith won last season, the Vezina Trophy as the league's top goalie. As I had just mentioned, they ended their Western road trip that began in February, however, with a 2-2 tie with the Calgary Flames. They're another step closer back home to visiting the Garden State, as they took on the New Jersey Devils. Bob Bourne and John Stanley each had 2 goals in the win, while Bossy had a big 3 assists, and Melanson was awesome in net with 28 saves. The Isles were rolling. However, they were unable to stop a hot Minnesota North Stars team who were having a great year, losing 4-2 in a competitive outing, and this would be the last game going into the All-Star break. And lo and behold, the All-Star game was in Long Island this year. It was the 35th mid-season spectacle. And to no surprise, the 3 men who the Isles built their dynasty on the backs of were all selected, which is no surprise considering how often they've already made the big game in the past, as Potvin was selected as a starter, while Trottier and Bossy, of course, were present. But it was nice to see Dave Langevin, who was grossly underrated for his time, get recognition on defense. However, the night belonged to Wayne Gretzky. It was his show, as he scored 4 goals, setting an all-time All-Star game record. But when it was back to business, it was against the division rival Washington Capitals. A huge 8-3 win after a hat-trick and a 4-point night from Bossy, and 4 assists for Trottier to boot. However, they did drop shocking back-to-back losses to the basement-dwelling Whalers at home, and then 4-1 to the Nordiques on the road. The team rebounded, however, getting the better of the lifeless and pathetic Penguins, who they had trouble with all year, surprisingly, and of course everybody remembers that playoff series in the year prior. But they got it 4-1. Bossy, Trottier, and Potvin each had 3 points. Billy Smith stopped 33 shots. Melanson then in net against the Habs at home stopped all 30 shots for his first shutout of the year, while Bob Bourne had 2 goals in a monster 5-0 win over the Montreal Canadiens. The Isles had trouble fighting off a struggling Jets squad, as all goals were scored in the first period on a 2-2 tie. Smith again, however, was amazing in net. And they then needed a huge team effort to fight to a 4-4 tie on the road with Chicago. Still a 4-game unbeaten streak as they still chased the Flyers for first, and Melanson was great in net. But that 4-game unbeaten streak would soon turn into a winless streak after being tied 3-3 with the Detroit Red Wings, one of the worst teams in the league. The Wings shot the Isles with 2 unanswered goals in the third, and the Isles would lose 5-3. Their struggles continued against weak teams. And their problems against the Flyers continue, as they were taken apart by the Flyers defense and just managed 17 shots and lost 2-0, despite another good performance by Melanson, and ended the month in the midst of a 4-game winless streak. Well, not a very good month, but nowhere near as bad as November or December, but a far cry from January. And enough to bring out naysayers yet again, as the Flyers were 14 points ahead of the Islanders, and the Capitals were just a point behind. And their losses to weak teams and consistently hardships against the Flyers are again key in writing this team off. Are they right? Well, be that as it may, to the surprise of literally nobody, the Isles have punched their ticket to the playoffs in the 9th straight season. Once again, Mike Bossy leads the team in scoring, has 11 goals for the month, also leading that category, but a shocking -2. While Trottier leads assists, he had a great month with 16 points. A 3-way tie for 10 points between Bourne, Tonelli, and Potvin. Injuries, however, to Clark Gillies and Butch Goring didn't help matters towards the end of the month either. And of course, that means Potvin led the team in defensive scoring. Had another good month, but this time as Thomas Janssen gets what he deserves in terms of recognition, leading the team in plus-minus with +6. Also, Mike McEwen missed most of the month with injuries. And the goalie sets the great numbers as well. And while their win-loss records weren't outstanding, their goals against average is almost completely identical, and in a word, superb. So indeed, the race is on between these three teams. Can the Islanders catch the Flyers for first place, or will they fall even further and the Washington Capitals could overtake them in second as we enter the final month of the NHL regular season? Well, going into the month with a 4-game winless streak, the Montreal Canadiens took a 2-0 lead in the first period as the second period was scoreless. The Isles struck huge, however, when goals by Janssen, Brent Sutter, and Tonelli were all scored 3.5 minutes apart in the third. They were 1 minute 30 seconds away from, ending the winless streak, but Guy Carbonneau solved the red-hot Billy Smith. The game ended at a 3-3 tie. The winless streak indeed goes to 5. The Isles, however, were far from licked, as they had looked like themselves again, winning 4 games out of 5. First, a huge 5-1 win over the Leafs, Bossy a 3-point night. Then there was another huge night for Billy Smith with 39 saves as Bossy, Langevin, and Person played superbly, and another 5-1 win, this time over their sack division rivals, the Devils. However, on the road, they were embarrassed by the St. Louis Blues 6-0 thanks to Wayne Babbage. They would then, however, squeak by the Penguins with 2 third-period goals. But this one was a big emphatic statement as they crushed their division rivals, the team on their tail, the Washington Capitals, 6-2, as Mike Bossy scored his 50th goal of the season, tying an NHL record with his 6th consecutive 50-goal season, a record he now shares at this point with Montreal Canadian Guy Lafleur, who of course was still in the league at this point. Despite the Isles looking good, they still sit 12 points behind the Flyers, and they hold off the Caps, however, just a step more with a 4-point lead. They would then have 3 divisional games and lose a tight 2-1 battle to the Rangers. Melanson was great in net, but Glenn Hanlon was sadly better. A wild shootout with the Kamikaze Devils, playing with nothing to lose, but the Isles went out 9-5 in the Garden State. Another hat trick for Bossy. Trottier had 4 points, while Bourne had 3 assists. And then a huge statement, a 9-2 throttling of the Flyers, finally beating them at home and in front of a very rabid crowd. This time it's Mats Hallen with the hat trick. Potvin has 4 assists. Gillies also has a huge 3-point night, and Melanson stops 40 shots. Despite the statement they made, it didn't make much of a difference in the standings, as the Isles are still 10 points behind the Flyers and still barely holding off the Capitals. After a 3-1 loss to the Bruins, the Isles were determined to finish the season strong. They beat the Rangers 3-2. Following that, a 2-goal game from Brent Sutter gives them a 4-1 win over the Penguins. Melanson playing another beauty. However, at this point, the Flyers had officially clinched first place in the Patrick Division, and the Caps were now tied with them for 92 points. But then they beat that tie with a huge 7-1 win in the Capital. Bourne having a huge 3-point night. Bossy having 2 goals. And then they cap it off with a 6-3 win over the Penguins. And then the Caps, on a 3-game losing streak, means the Isles now clinch second place officially. And the final game of the season, despite that big 9-2 win a short while ago, it's the Flyers who send a message this time with a 4-2 win. An excellent month and a big way to end the season for the Islanders. However, looking at their final record of 42, 26, and 12 for 96 points, again brought out the doubters in the media because of how the Flyers took control of the division, 22 points down from last season now the Isles go, and other contenders will truly emerge. Mike Bossy was a true sniping machine. His 16 goals and 22 points gave him the scoring lead again, as he led every single month. Brian Trottier is right there with a huge 17 points and also had a really good month, but the biggest surprise was young Brent Sutter, who again emerged as a scoring threat when he joined the team last season, but wasn't known for it this year. He had the best one of his career, however, today with 15 points and a huge plus 15. And Denny Potvin didn't score any goals, but he did have 15 assists, and that's enough to tie Sutter for third best. Bourne, Gillies, and Dwayne Sutter also had big months forward-wise. So, of course, that means Potvin again leads the team in defensive scoring, which is no surprise, as for the longest time now, he's always done that. Morrow, Langevin, and Janssen were also superb, and as was the returning Mike McEwen. But then insane plus 15 from Brent Sutter was the best on the team, and a shock to many. And hey, what can you say? Both goaltenders again looked fantastic. A couple rough losses from Melanson, but he and Smith cap off a great year with a big month. As I mentioned, the media is still split, which is pretty sad. The team that is 3-time defending Stanley Cup champions still having to prove themselves to a bunch of experts with pencils. And hey, to be fair, I'm on a computer right now. But they will soon be contending with the Washington Capitals, a team who had their best year in their history and making their very first playoff appearance. And many are saying if a first-round playoff upset were to happen this year, this would be it. And if they get past Washington, Philly will be way too much to handle. It's the same top three as the year prior. Mike Bossy led the team in scoring with a monster 60 goals and 58 assists for 118 points. As I mentioned, his sixth consecutive year with 50 goals, tying an NHL record at that time, which was held by Guy Lafleur. It was also the fourth time he has reached 60 goals in the third straight years he has done that. But last year he had 147 points, so his production is down, but again, that's just like saying, hey, you know, these two pieces of pizza are still pizza, even though one is a little more mediocre than the last, so you get what I'm saying. Trotier's 89 points is second, but a bit of a letdown. Sometimes this is his lowest point total since the 1976-77 season, which was his second year in the league, and the first time he's failed to reach 100 points since. Tonelli's 71 points is third, but his final month of the season was not very good, and he also suffered some injuries. This is also down from the 93 points he had the year prior. Clark Gillies and Butch Goring also had lackluster seasons, and their production decreased significantly. Mike Bossy's 118 points, however, was good enough for fourth in the league, and for the third straight year, and the fourth time in his career, he finishes in the top 5 in points. Denny Potvin, to the surprise of nobody, also leads all defenders on the team in scoring, as he has done so in all 10 seasons he's played in the NHL. 12 goals and 54 assists for 66 points in just under 70 games, not bad. However, Thomas Janssen leads the team for the first time in his career with plus-minus with a plus 40. Who many Isles teammates stated that they owe a lot to him in this particular season, and he does not get the recognition he deserves. Dave Langevin was also a huge factor, and Ken Morrow, despite some rough patches, had a good year, and Mike McEwen, however, missed 38 games. Potvin is 10th in defenseman scoring in the NHL. Despite his injury issues, was able to keep a slip into those rankings. Also, Janssen ranked in the top 10 for plus-minus, and his plus 40 was tied for 10th, best in the league. Trottier, Bossy, Morrow, and Tonelli, however, all made the top 10 last year, but their numbers were all down in this category. The goaltenders were superb. Melanson and Smith were a great combo, but it was Melanson overall who had the better year, and this was another question the media was asking. Who do they go with in the playoffs? Some had still written off Smith as too old and too tired, and it was Rolly's time to shine. Melanson was 5th in the league in wins, 3rd in goals against average, and 1st in save percentage. Smith was 4th in goals against average, and just 2nd behind his teammate in save percentage. And since they gave the least amount of goals all season, that means the two shared the William M. Jennings Trophy in its 2nd year of existence. So that brings us to more awards, and look at that, Mike Bossy, for the very first time, is gratefully awarded the Lady Byng Trophy for excellence and sportsmanship. In terms of other hardware, Mike Bossy and John Tonelli were also tied for 10th in Hart Trophy MVP voting. The award, of course, was won by Wayne Gretzky of Edmonton. Bossy's win for the Lady Byng, however, also saw Butch Goring tied for 17th in voting. For the Vezina Trophy as the league's top goaltender, Rolly Melanson was a finalist and the first runner-up. Billy Smith came in 4th. Pete Peters of the Boston Bruins won it. And for the Frank J. Selke Trophy as the league's top defensive forward, 4 Islanders contended for this award. John Tonelli came in 8th, Trottier 13th, and Mike Bossy and Butch Goring were all tied at 24th. However, shows how dynamic the Isles really were. But for the Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman, nobody, Potvin, Langevin, or Janssen, didn't register a single vote. To me, that just isn't right. Mike Bossy, for the 3rd straight year in his career, makes the NHL's first All-Star team. He also made the 2nd team in his first 2 seasons of his career. And Melanson was rewarded to a selection to the 2nd All-Star team. The Isles had 4 total All-Stars last season, but only 2 this year. And we notice the common theme here is decrease. On this graphic, we look at the Islanders' goals for, goals against, power play, and penalty kill since their dynasty began. In goals, they started rough at first in 79-80, but over their 2 dominant seasons, they were the top dogs in 1980-81, and only behind the Oilers in 81-82. But this year, their goal production went from 2nd to 15th, only 6 teams worse than they were. They lost 83 goals on the year compared to the year prior. In goals against, however, they'd only get better year after year. Their first 2 years, well, you know, they were tremendous with 4th and going to 2nd, but then now they allowed the least amount of goals in the league. A credit to both their defense as well as their amazing goaltenders. The Isles' power play and penalty kill were middle of the road in their first year of this dynasty, but the extra man advantage skyrocketed to the best in the league in the next 2 seasons. Their penalty kill slowly improved thanks to the addition of Butch Goring, as well as Tonelli and the Sutter brothers. Their power play took a dip, however, from tops to 5th, not too alarming as it was still very formative, and the penalty kill, thanks to those very parties, was the first in the league this year, an all-time best. Well, it's just about playoff time, and the uncertainty and the doubt and the opinions of the public and the media were running wild and all over the place in Scatterbrain. But that's a whole other video altogether, as the Islanders in the playoffs, a dynasty having to prove itself, needs its own video. That'll be part 2 of our look at the 1982-83 Islanders, but we hope you enjoyed part 1. Any other teams you'd like to see us cover in a given season? They also could be winners, losers, top of the mountain, basement dwellers, middle of the road, contenders, pretenders, and everything in between. Leave a suggestion in the comment section, hit like on the video, share it to your social media, and also subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I'll see ya.